Hey, first graders. So this week I wanted to just kind of give you a quick overview of the end of the Trumpet of the Swan since we didn't get to finish it. So Lewis is finishing up his job at the nightclub in Boston, and he's, remember, staying at the zoo, and then Serena comes flying in and she's injured. And so the zoo wants to keep her there because they don't have very many trumpeter swans. So it says, unfortunately, the zoo wants to clip her wings. Lewis convinces the head man not to clip her wings until Lewis can get a friend to come and talk to him. And that friend is Sam Beaver. So Sam gets a telegraph from Lewis. Remember, we talked about that a telegraph is sort of like a letter that people used to send. And the letter asks Sam to come to the zoo for help. So Sam comes and he makes a deal with the zoo that Serena will be sent free as long as when Lewis is older and has baby cygnets that he will give one to the zoo. And so that's kind of the deal that they make, that if he has, and I think it has to do with if that baby cygnet would need some special care or protection, that the zoo would be a good place for it then if it wasn't able to live in the wild. So that's the deal they make so that Serena can be free. So Serena and Lewis go back to Red Rock Lakes, and Lewis takes all his money with him that he's made, and they find their families, and he gives the money to his father. And this is where it gets exciting. His father decides that he has to go back to that music store in Billings and give over $4,000 to the music store owner to pay for his trumpet and for the damage that was called. And so he starts flying there, but the store owner sees him and he gets out a gun and he shoots at him. But luckily he just barely nicks him. But his father is very dramatic. I don't know if you remember that from the story. And when he sees his own blood, he faints and falls out of the sky. And so all these people come swarming around and they're screaming to call an ambulance. And they end up hospitalizing the swan. They take the money. So here's the picture of them having the conversation over what to do with the money and who deserves to keep it, which eventually the store owner does. And then they take Lewis's father off in an ambulance to the hospital, which is pretty silly since he's a swan. So after the store owner keeps the money he needs to pay for the horn, then he donates the rest of the money to the Audubon Society, which is a society that helps to take care of birds and teach people about birds. And then the father swan, Lewis's father, he actually breaks out of the hospital and is able to fly back home and brag about his dangerous adventure. Now, the last chapter of the book is pretty happy. Serena and Lewis go back to the pond and where he was born up in Canada. And we also find out that Sam Beaver was inspired by his trip to the zoo, and he's going to grow up and becomes a zookeeper. And Lewis takes Serena there, and then they settle down and have their own family. And Sam gets a job at the Philadelphia Zoo in the very end. So at the very Another thing that happens at the end that I'll read to you is that Sam and his father go back to that lake, and his father is asking him, have you seen your friend Lewis? And Sam doesn't really tell him. He kind of keeps it a secret, but he does see Lewis there with his babies now. So the story kind of comes all the way back around. So it says, tonight I heard Lewis's horn. My father heard it too. The wind was right, and I could hear the notes on the taps. Just as darkness fell, there is nothing in all the world that I like better than the trumpet of the swan. And then Sam is writing in his notebook, which he writes in his diary quite a bit throughout the book. And he says, Sam put his notebook away. He slid into bed, and he lay there wondering, what does crepuscular mean? And in less than 3 minutes, he was fast asleep. On the pond where the swans were, Lewis put his trumpet away. The cygnets crept under their mother's wings. Darkness settled on the woods and fields and marsh. A loon called its wild night cry, and as Lewis relaxed and prepared for sleep, all of his thoughts were of how lucky he was to inhabit such a beautiful earth, and how lucky he had been to solve his problems with music, and how pleasant it was to look forward to another night of sleep and another day tomorrow, and fresh morning and the light that returns with the day. And so that's how it ends.